Hello everyone, and welcome to Character Gallery. I'm one of your hosts, MasterOfTheLemons, aka Lemmy, and today I'm here with a guest host, MilkTankerMedia. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited to talk about our character today, which is Oliver. Firstly, this is like the most high-profile character we've had on the show so far, where it's like, because so far we've been doing pretty minor characters. We've been doing like Salty, Daisy, so like, what would you say is a general overview of Oliver's personality? Who do you think he is, just kind of at a glance?
Well, first of all, I think if it's not already obvious at this point, we should clarify that we are talking about Oliver the Great Western Engine and not the Oliver the Excavator.
Yes,
that would be a very different kind of episode, I think. All right, so I think the general overview of Oliver, just to kind of recap his character, is he's a Great Western tank engine. He has most famously escaped from being scrapped with the help of a wonderful Sodor engine named Douglas. And he came to Sodor with his coach and his brake fan. At first, he had some struggles when he was on Sodor, just managing trucks and trying to fit in. But eventually, he did manage to take a stand for himself and kind of earn the trucks' respect. And now he has proved himself to be a very valuable asset to the railway. He works on the Little Western branch line with Duck. It's very charmingly named, and they wouldn't have it any other way. So that's my interpretation of Oliver at a glance.
Yeah, I would say that pretty much nails who he is. And it's like, it's interesting is that most of the stories we have about Oliver are from that kind of Oliver the Western Engine arc where, like, he's come to Sodor and he's dealing with the trucks and he makes a fool of himself and all that. But, I think that most of the inspiration I take from Oliver and, what stories I use to kind of build my idea of him, it's honestly mostly from Escape and what he does there. That says more about Oliver than any other story that he's been in. Because think about how unusual what he did is. Think about just how rare it is for an engine to actually decide to escape. It's like the whole story of Thomas. You hear about scrap, you hear about engines being withdrawn, and it's a really sad idea. But then you get to Oliver, and you realize for the first time, wait a minute, you can just leave? You can just escape? That's a thing that can happen? And it's like Oliver he throws the whole system and turns it on its head. And you're like, wow, I didn't even know that was possible.
No, it's really interesting that you bring that up. I had not actually thought of it that way, and I'll talk about this a little bit more down the line. But for me, really, the defining moments about Oliver are what happens to him after he arrives on Sodor.
Interesting.
But first, I do want to address, since we are talking about escape, part of what's interesting is what Oliver really represents to Sodor. And you hit on this a little bit. Never before have we really seen anything like Oliver doing this.
And never since.
It's now what is it? The 1960s. Dieselization is coming for real. We can't laugh it off anymore, like we did with Duck and the Diesel. This is now a real problem. And so what happens here is Oliver comes to Sodor and he makes this grand escape, this grand entrance, and he becomes a big point of discussion for what he represents as an engine. We see in the beginning of Oliver the Western Engine, Gordon and Henry and James are all talking about, they see him as a role model for bravery.
Symbol is really the word, where it's like Oliver is just, he represents something to all these engines because they're terrified of dieselization. They're terrified of being scrapped. Even the engines on Sodor, who should know better and know that the Fat Controller would never do it, by the nature of being an engine, are still terrified of what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, no, exactly. And they kind of hold him up on this pedestal as a hero, as what all engines should aspire to be.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing, is that, from Oliver's perspective, it's like, wow, these big engines are praising me. And meanwhile, what it really is that those engines, Gordon, Henry, and James, are so terrified and insecure deep down that Oliver is a breath of fresh air to them. It seems to me that Gordon is very impacted by Oliver. And I would think that this wouldn't be enough, usually, for Gordon to override his elitism towards tank engines.
Oh, yeah.
It's very strange that he does that. But I think what it is that Gordon is just coming off the news that his brothers have all been scrapped. And so then, seeing an engine arrive from BR, who basically stuck it to them and beat them and came to Sodor anyway, I think that means a lot to him. You know, just a small victory after this devastating loss would mean so much to him, and he would idolize Oliver for it.
And I think they do touch on that because, you know, right at the beginning of the episode where Oliver has just come back, the one after Escape. I'm blanking on the name right now, but you know what I'm talking about. The opening scene of that episode is Flying Scotsman departing from Sodor and Sir Topham Hatt asserting, "We will always be a place where real engines will have a home."
Yeah.
And I think it's this idea, and then Oliver coming, that really kind of cements the idea of Sodor as a safe haven for steam engines, and for engines of all types later down the road. And that's really a theme that gets played on a lot later in the series. So it's kind of a huge turning point for what Sodor is as a place.
Right, I mean, remembering that the Railway series started in an era where steam engines were still around, right? It wasn't always a thing about a bygone era. It used to be modern day. And so as we slowly got to the 60s, where now real-life steam engines are disappearing, and you know that Audrey writes realistically, you start wondering, well, hold on, is he going to scrap the engines? Is this where the story ends? And then it doesn't. That is the part where it breaks from the rest of the world. Sodor was normal until the 60s. That is the point at which it became a very special place, and where it really became different from every other railway, and that it just refused to die. It had this enduring spirit. And who better to represent that spirit than Oliver, who really just, he stuck it to BR, he refused to be scrapped, and he risked life and limb to go to Sodor and accomplish his dreams. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful idea.
Yeah, and I think kind of going off of that, I think this is going to be a really interesting episode because I think you and I have picked up like different elements of Oliver's character.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see this going along, but I think we're going to have very different interpretations of the layers underneath
I bet
him.
you're right. You know, I mean, it seems to me like you're focusing more on his Sodor days, and I'm very focused on this one element of him where he's like, I mainly color Oliver by his courage and his will to live and his drive to kind of to save his own life. But really, most of the material we have on Oliver isn't about that.
Yeah, no, because his escape from scrap is largely like the kind of the prologue to his character.
Yeah, no,
when we first meet Oliver, he's like in the middle of the escape.
Yeah,
like all of this decision making on his part about wanting to escape, trying to get away with his own life. That all happens before we meet him. So we talked about sort of the expectation that's being set for him. Gordon and all the others seeing him as a model for bravery. We talked to him about what he means for the overall story, for Sodor, for dieselization, for what Sodor is as a refugee haven.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this, and I've started to realize this must have been just immense pressure for Oliver.
Yeah,
he
you're right.
just came off of a railway where it was decided that he was not good enough, that he was not going to be worthy of continuing to work there. And now he's found this new home that he just arrived on. And quite frankly, I think there's evidence to show that he's not fully comfortable yet when he arrives. He's still scared of making a mistake, especially when this expectation is being set for him by the big engines. The story describes it as, it's going to his funnel, and he's becoming overconfident and all of these things.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't really buy that.
Really me neither.
Oliver never really struck me as an arrogant engine.
Yeah,
I think what's happening
either.
is he's starting to, this expectation is being set for him, and he is trying too hard to live up to that.
Yeah,
trying.
I think you're right, especially because think about it. He has just what he has just endured. I mean, he's been near death, right? He was about to be scrapped, and now. I mean, he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that never happens again, right? So if that means really emphasizing the qualities that they value about him, he's going to do it, right? Because he's a survivor. If I could describe Oliver in one word, I would describe it as survivor. And it's the fact that he comes back, he comes to this railway, And they send him all these signals about, hey, we love these things about you, right? So of course he's going to amplify those things, because
exactly.
Why wouldn't he?
He wants to live up to what he thinks he's supposed to be. He wants to be the hero that everybody is calling him. And deep down, I think he's terrified that if he isn't that, he's going to lose his place on the railway. He's going to lose his home again, and this time he might be scrapped for real. And he's really scared of making a mistake. He was just rescued, and he wants to prove that he was worthy of being given a second chance. And I think we really see this, especially post his accident.
Yeah.
At the turntable, when we first see him in Toad Stands By, he is just shattered. He's dejected. He's humiliated. He knows that first of all, the trucks are going haywire, and he knows that all of the increased antics is his own fault. He sees it as his own fault for being careless. Because they've really pounced on his humiliation and targeted him, and taken that as an opportunity to grow bolder, to the point where even none of the other engines can really keep them in order. There's a moment in that story where the other engines are like, "We're really sorry, Oliver. We can't do anything." And he says, "It's my fault. I should have known better."
Yeah.
And it's in that moment that I think we really see, he feels like he's let everybody down.
Yeah. Now, I never thought about this before, because I had thought before that I think Oliver would be a little bit uncomfortable when he first arrives, but I didn't think about the fact that he's trying to live up to everybody else's expectations, which of course he would be, right? That makes perfect sense for who he is as a character. Like, he's very lucky to be saved, right? And everybody there, like, they've done a great thing for him. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit unfair the way they treat him. Because think about what happens. Oliver comes to this island, and then they immediately just paint him back up in Great Western colors. They all praise him. They all say, oh, how great you are. Tell us about your adventures. Tell us about what you've been doing. Tell us. And it's like, think about what he just endured. Think about what he's gone through. He probably has PTSD. Don't badger him about what he's been enduring. I mean, like, you give him some room to breathe, Don't just treat him like everything's normal, like he's back to the 30s all of a sudden. And, like, he's gone through some serious stuff. He's probably pretty traumatized by his experiences. I mean, he almost died, right? So, like, don't, you gotta treat him with more compassion than that. And I think the other engines are a little bit sheltered. Like, they don't realize fully. Like, I don't think Donald and Douglas would badger Oliver with these questions, really. And I think Douglas, because of his compassion for Oliver and seeing just how, knowing exactly what that feels like, I think that's why Douglas acts so quickly. And notice, Douglas knows the exact right thing to do, like right when he meets Oliver, because he knows what he would want to happen. He just wants him to get out of there. That's the first thing that needs to happen. Nothing else matters, to get him out of there. And meanwhile, other engines, Gordon, Henry, and James, they don't know what it's like. The closest that they've come is Henry was, like, in danger of being scrapped when he was ill. But even then, that was never, like, a glaring threat. He was never, he was never in a siding ready to be scrapped. The other engines don't get it. They don't know what it's like to be in that situation. They don't know what it's like to really, truly fear for your life.
And with Henry, that was sorry to interrupt, but with Henry, that was also more of that was a personal thing.
Yeah.
That was like, you're in trouble because you're sick, because you personally are having struggles and having problems.
Yeah.
It's different with Dieselization and with Oliver, because it suddenly becomes, you're in trouble because of who you are. You didn't do anything wrong other than existing, that is a crime worth punishing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the entire system that he lives in is built to destroy him. And that's terrifying, because there's no way out of that, right? I mean, the only way you survive that is literally deciding to break all the rules and escape, to get out of there. It must have just taken everything out of him. It must have taken a lot of willpower. I mean, because think about how everyone would react, right? Finding out that Oliver was going to run away. Because at least a few engines had to have known. And they probably would have been like, oh, you're never going to make it. Are you serious? You really think that you're going to be able to escape BR and run away to Sodor? You're not a storybook engine, Oliver. You're a real locomotive. You don't stand a chance.
Cough.
Yeah, they all would have acted that way. And Oliver would have had to ignore all of them and go anyway. And that's very impressive. The fact that he's that much of a free thinker, that he would have that much confidence in his own opinion that he would be able to do that, because other engines I think would cave under the pressure and think maybe I shouldn't run away, maybe there is no chance of it. Oliver just refused. He's just like, no, I'm going. I have to go, right? And he's in that default survivor mode.
I know it's interesting, because I think I'm actually going to disagree with you a little bit here, and I'll give you my reasoning in a second. So what we see in Toad Stands By is another moment where Oliver is kind of at his lowest point. He's humiliated, he's dejected, and he's done everything wrong so far, or at least he interprets what he's done as being wrong. I might know
where you're going with this, but keep going.
So what we see, I think, is this moment where we have, with some encouragement from Toad that I think is very important, he decides, you know what, this is my fault, but I'm going to clean it up. I have to put things right. And it's in this moment that I think he really comes into his own, because he's putting things right no longer so that he can live up to this ideal of being a hero, but just because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And I think this is really the episode that should be called Oliver Owns Up. Because this is the moment where he's trying to make up for his own mistake with the trucks. And he's still nervous to go out and to do the thing, to put Scruffy in line. You see it in his face, and in the way he looks at Sir Topham Hatt after the deed is done. He still thinks he could lose his place here if things go wrong. But he does it anyway because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And ironically, it's in that moment, I think, that he becomes more of a hero than ever he was before.
Because of his intentions.
It's because of his intentions. And this is why I think this is Oliver's defining moment. The moment he stands up, the moment he stands up against Scruffy in Toad Stands By is what I think really defines him.
That is a really powerful moment. And I definitely see your point there. The thing is, I could even see that working with my concepts as well, just because the thing is, the more I think about it, the most impressive and noteworthy thing Oliver's ever done is his escape. And I think just all the engine's responses to that would kind of reflect that. However, I think that's him running on instinct. I don't know if Oliver would have known he was capable of running away before he was actually put in a position where he had to.
Yeah, I think it was really a moment of desperation, a moment of last resort. And I kind of get more the sense that, Oliver, he didn't want to run away. He wanted things to get better. He thought things could get better. But I like to imagine that there was a moment where Toad said, okay, no, this is not going down. Mr. Oliver, we gotta get out of here. And
that's where I really thought you were going with it earlier, where it's like, I was thinking that you were going to say that the escape was Toad's idea. And that he's really because his encouragement in Toad Stands By really makes it look like, it's high time we talked about Toad, by the way, so I'm glad we're getting into him.
Oh yeah, most of the way through the episode, we can finally talk about the main character connected to Oliver.
But yeah, basically, so Toad is just, I think that, can I just say Toad is like Oliver's butler, and it's amazing. That is so great that he's got this really loyal butler, especially because the way I see Oliver, I see him as, I think that Oliver is on some level a little bit impulsive, and will kind of just, he'll act, he'll make snap judgments because he knows that, like when he knows it's the right thing, he knows it's the right thing. He's a gut thinker. And so he, when he ran away, that was a gut decision. It's all right, we got to get out of here. It got to a certain point where things got so bad, he immediately knew, okay, I have to leave everything behind. And he did, right? He can make that decision very quickly because he has very strong survival instincts. And I think the same thing is reflected in Toad Stands By, because I love that scene where Toad is talking to Oliver, and he proposes the plan, and Oliver's like, no, Doc, Toad's right, I have to, and he basically, and then Toad is like,
yes.
And Toad's almost a little bit surprised that Oliver agreed so quickly. He's like, I mean no disrespect, you understand, Mr. Oliver. And Toad's like, no, yes, of course, Toad, no, anyway. And he keeps going with the plan, right? He doesn't even hesitate. He's just like, yeah, we're doing this. This is exactly what needs to be done. And he
and what he says there is exactly what we were talking about. It's this was my fault. This is my mess. I have to be the one to put it right. They're not going to stop unless I do something about it.
Yeah.
That is like the beautiful moment for me, is Oliver. I think whereas the escape, as grandiose and symbolic as it was, really came out of a point more of desperation.
Yeah.
This comes out of a place of resolve, of him actively deciding, I have to do this because it's the right thing.
The thing is, I really like the... I don't know if I would say the escape is my favorite Oliver moment. I would say it's... I like it because it tells me a lot about Oliver that I could then apply to situations like these. I think there's a lot about Oliver's escape and about Oliver's experience with BR that would really inform his worldview. And that's really what I think is interesting about it. Because the escape itself is pretty cool, right? I mean, it's an awesome episode.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a wonderful episode.
But it's also, like, it's just kind of one concept that's pretty straightforward. And what I'm more interested in is how it affects Oliver's worldview going forward. Because I think that Oliver would actually become, I touched upon this earlier, but I think that after dieselization, Oliver would be a lot more cynical and jaded. And honestly, I think Duck would be the more hopeful of the two, because Duck would actually not have experienced that, right? And so I think Oliver would have a certain cynicism about him, where he just kind of he would not be the same engine after modernization. You know, he would still be able to crack a joke and have a good conversation and be charming, but you would always see this kind of you would see this level of seriousness behind his eyes. You would kind of see that he's seeing the world in a way most engines will never see it. And, that has informed the way that he will look at things going forward. But I really do love the idea of Toad, just of Toad in general. He's just so much fun, right? Because he's I think out of every character we've ever had in Thomas, Toad is the most loyal. Like, he's the most loyal. Loyalty is his main trait. He's very unflinchingly, unquestionably loyal to Oliver. He has full faith in him, and he will do anything for him. And, I think that's great, because Oliver's been in so many interesting situations, especially during the escape, but other situations as well, maybe before that, back on the Great Western, that it would be really interesting to see how Toad and Oliver interacted back then, and the lengths that Toad would go to actually assist Oliver.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring that up, because I actually do want to touch on... Okay, quick side note. I did rewatch Snow Engine before I was watching this. Really weird episode for Oliver as a character. But just quick plug, the Angelus narration is freaking hilarious, and everyone should go and rewatch this episode again. Toad in that episode is like the best thing I could have ever asked for. Anyway.
I do really love that episode, though, and I think it adds something, which is that Oliver is, the idea that Oliver hates snow is like an interesting idea. It could be... I kind of have this gritty approach to Oliver, so I would do this, but, I almost wonder if it's like, back in the late days of BR, there wasn't enough shed space, and they would leave their engines out in the cold. And, like, Oliver's hatred of snow is the fact that he's got trauma from those days. Like, it could be something like that.
Just traumatized by winter.
Yeah, honestly. I could really see it happening, though. And also, just during his escape, he was probably had to stay out in the cold a few times. Though
I'm sure.
Though it probably... Don't know if it was during... You could probably put it during winter if you wanted to. Depends.
Yeah, I don't think they ever really specify. So, from the illustrations, it looks like not winter.
Yeah.
But, like, you could interpret it however you wanted.
Yeah, you could change that if you wanted.
Okay, but back to what I was actually going to talk about after that little Snow Engine side tangent. I do actually want to talk about... There's a couple of Oliver episodes in Season 5 that I think we really kind of underscore a lot of the points we were talking about. Specifically, Oliver's find. So in the beginning of that episode, what we see is Oliver, sort of pining. He's unhappy. He's pining for a long run, and Toad asks him about it. Oliver tells him, and Toad's like, "Well, maybe you should bring this up to the Fat Controller. I'm sure he would be able to help you." And there's this line that the narrator says, and but Oliver said nothing. He just grew unhappier.
Which
I thought was really interesting.
That's a great example, because the thing is, Oliver, I don't think he'll ever be fully comfortable asking the Fat Controller for anything. I think he feels like he's been given too much, where he's Oliver, the Fat Controller saved his life, right? Oliver is indebted
several
to him
times,
forever.
in fact.
Yeah. And so it really just, Oliver cannot bear to ask for any more. He thinks it's not right. I mean, he's already, the Fat Controller has given him a greater gift than anything he could possibly give him. He can't ask for any more. And so luckily you have Toad there, who isn't really worried about inconveniencing the Fat Controller to a degree. He's like, the thing is, I think Toad has, you could even say that Toad's priorities are out of order, but he has very strong priorities, where Oliver is his number one priority, and everybody else comes like way below. And he's still a very kind brake van, and will do a lot, and is very loyal to the railway and the Fat Controller and the other engines. But Oliver always comes first. And so
this was my evidence, or part of my evidence for why I imagined Oliver's escape being a little bit more of Toad's idea and more of like a desperate act that Oliver tried to. We see in this episode, he doesn't want to cause trouble. He doesn't want to complain. He doesn't want to make it seem like he's unhappy here. I think it might be some of that, still that lingering fear. But what we see is Toad being really the one to take action. And you talked about Oliver being, impulsive. I see that a lot more with Toad, especially in Busy Going Backwards.
The thing is, I would say that your interpretation of this, I don't want to say more accurate. It is more accurate, I think, to the source material. But like, the thing is, like, I think any interpretation is valid, right? But basically, that's like, what you're saying here, I think it fits the most stories out of both of our interpretations. I'm just quite attached to the idea of Oliver being this more jaded, cynical kind of survivor type who kind of, who kind of acts, and, he's really the one who takes charge. But I can really, really see what you're saying here, where it's like Toad is the one kind of behind things. Because I've always liked the idea that in at least in Toad Stands By, you kind of get a taste of, you start wondering about the things that Oliver's done in the past, because you see what Toad does, and you're like, he's the one who orchestrated all of this. And all the trucks are terrified of Oliver, but it was Toad's idea. Toad was behind Toad's idea. This. And it's like...
the episode is Toad Stands By. Toad is the one who's there, who's always there for Oliver, whatever he needs. And I think he's the one that Oliver always leans on in the times when he needs the most guidance to figure out what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Oliver really leans on Toad, and Toad, I think, gets a vast majority of his self-worth from being loyal to Oliver. That's his big purpose in life, is he serves Oliver, right? And the two of them are just, incredibly close in that regard. I honestly wonder about Toad Stands By, because it's a little bit different in the Railway series. In the TV series, because we talk about Toad being behind the whole Scruffy incident, right? But I think that goes deeper than we realize. Because the thing is, in the TV series, Toad is on some siding somewhere, right? Standing by, watching the whole thing. But in the Railway series, Toad is a stopping block behind Oliver's train. And I wonder if Toad was coupled to the back of the train and put his brakes on when Oliver was pulling, and got Scruffy torn in half.
This is something I actually wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Because I'm not really sure. The question is, was destroying Scruffy intentional?
I think it was. I think that Toad's capable of more than we give him credit for. Because again, it goes back to, I think that Toad's main priority is Oliver. And if he sees somebody ruining Oliver's life, he's going to take some serious action. I think that, Scruffy I almost see like a mob boss. He's in charge of all the trucks. He's orchestrating tons of accidents a day. He's a monster, right? And Toad sees this guy.
And he feels, it's interesting, I always thought to myself, why did they make Scruffy a private owner wagon? It's because he's not owned by the railway, therefore Sir Topham Hatt can't really hold him accountable, and that gives Scruffy more empowerment. He feels more... he feels invincible, actually.
That's really smart. Yeah, I love that. That makes so much sense, because it's like, I read it earlier and I was just thinking like, okay, I think it's like a source of arrogance that makes him different. But that's even like deeper, where it's like, that makes a lot of sense. That, Scruffy would be, the Fat Controller can't really do anything. Somebody else owns him. Until
the moment where Scruffy is destroyed, and then Sir Topham Hatt is able to come over and say, see, look, this truck was not in proper working order. We cannot be held accountable for this. It's your fault.
That's probably why he's so happy about it, is because he can actually finally stick it to, that company and say, okay, look, your truck is unsafe. It is not in working order. This is not on me. That's fantastic. But yeah, to answer that question, to answer your question, I legitimately think that Toad planned for Scruffy to be torn in half, and and it sounds dark, and it is pretty dark. But the thing is, I kind of like the idea that Toad is this really sweet, break van that talks something like this, and he's got such a nice voice, and you think he's so cute, but like deep down, he's capable of more than we realize, because his priorities. He prioritizes Oliver. And when you've got somebody who is as big of a threat to Oliver as Scruffy, especially because of what we talked about earlier, right? Because Oliver thinks that he's still in danger of being sent away. And now Scruffy is literally flaming his reputation across the island, making him look as bad as possible. Who is more likely to get Oliver sent away than Scruffy, right? He's doing everything in his power to get Oliver sent away, essentially. So, of course, Toad is going to do something about that. Of course, Toad is going to take action. We rarely see Toad mad. It very rarely happens, just because he's so composed and he's so positive, and he's very much like a butler in the way that he acts. However, I think that that's one of the few... if they redid this in CGI, I think that what would happen is Toad, the first time he hears Scruffy making jokes about Oliver and inflaming Oliver's reputation, you would see Toad get mad. He'd be angry. And that's the moment he would decide he's got to go. And then he would formulate this whole plan, talk to Douglas. And the thing is, when we see, in the episode, when we see Scruffy get destroyed, Toad is smiling afterwards, right? As if that was the plan.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like...
Toad is totally Oliver's vindictive butler. I'm sold on this.
Yeah. I really like the idea of that, just because, I think that it fits in well. The thing is, what I like to do is I like to emphasize the most prominent trait of a character, right? So for Oliver, what I've emphasized is his survivor mentality. And for Toad, what I've emphasized is his loyalty. And I think that taking that to the logical conclusion, I think that he would do something like this. Because, Scruffy's given him every excuse in the book. It's not like Scruffy's got a spotless record. Really, he's a monster. He's crashed trains before. He's a danger to the engines on the island. Toad's kind of doing everyone a service, especially because Toad's job, his purpose in life, is to stop trains. It's to literally do the opposite of what Scruffy does. So really, by taking him out, he's doing exactly what his job is, and he's probably saved a few lives in the process. So, I think it's on some level honorable what Toad does, but at the same time, it's in a gray area where, I don't think Oliver fully realizes that was Toad's intention. The more I think about this, the more I am sold on, Oliver thought the plan was just to prove that he could handle the train. Yeah, exactly. And Toad always thought the plan was destroy Scruffy. Yeah.
It didn't tell Oliver about it, but I think you see a little bit of that nervousness in Oliver at the end. I don't think he knew that that's what was going to happen. Yeah, no, exactly. And so I really love that as a concept, and that's just ever since I first kind of thought of that. That's how I've seen Toad. Is just kind of he's willing to go to great lengths to assist Oliver. Any lengths, in fact. Yeah, really. But yeah, so there are a few other characters really that we should cover if we're talking about Oliver. We touched upon Duck a little bit earlier. We all kind of assume that Oliver is a kind of a Great Western fanatic too, that he really cares about the Great Western and that he really respects it, and just because that's what we've been shown through Duck. But I think that the two are different in that respect, because here's the thing. Duck didn't really witness the Great Western turning into the monstrosity for steam engines that was BR. Duck, I think, would have seen the fall of the Great Western Railway as almost like BR had slain the Great Western, right? Like the Great Western was the victim. Right. But Oliver was around for 20 years after the Great Western ended. So at first, I think Oliver would have thought that way. He would have thought, oh, how dare this new, system, replace my beloved railway. But over time, he would realize the reality of the situation, which is that the Great Western wasn't slain. It abandoned him.
it basically it gave up. The Great Western forfeited its power and its identity to this greater entity, and that entity destroyed Oliver's life, killed all of his friends, and forced him to run away. And Oliver would realize, hold on, no railway is perfect. I don't know if Oliver would totally like being painted in Great Western colors. I think he would accept it. And I think when the Fat Controller gives him those colors, he would be very grateful, because it's better than BR colors. And also just because he's not going to argue with the man who just had a very heated meeting with BR to save his life. But
Can you even imagine what was going down in that room?
I know. It's like the Fat Controller must have just a silver tongue. The fact that he could purchase a stolen locomotive, he must be very, very good at convincing people. And also that, in general, I think that I don't think Duck and Oliver, I think they'd argue a little bit sometimes. Like, I think they get along pretty well on a day-to-day basis. But think about their vastly different perspectives and worldviews. Because Oliver is essentially this rebel who decides to break all the rules because he realizes it's the right thing to do. And Duck is meticulously abiding by every single rule in the book, to the point where he could probably, if he had an employee manual, he could cite specific chapters to you because he knows the rules so well. And it's like, Duck, obviously he thinks it was the right thing to do for Oliver to save his own life, right? He agrees with that. However, Oliver's rebel mentality isn't going to end there. Oliver is going to analyze every situation. He's going to point out flaws in the system. He's going to say, well, this rule isn't fair. This rule isn't fair. Well, we shouldn't do this. Why can't we shunt the trucks this way? Why are we doing this? Why do we do it this way? And Duck would be driven crazy, because Duck would be like, because that's the rule. We follow the rules on this branch, Oliver. That's what we do. And it's
what I think captures this perfectly? I don't know, did you ever see, I think it was TARDIS Rescue did an episode with Duck and Oliver had the two-toned whistle or whatever it was?
That sounds vaguely familiar. I haven't seen it in a while, though.
But there's a moment where Oliver's like using his two-tone whistle, and one of them is supposed to be like an official like emergency whistle, and Oliver's just like, do, I can make music. And Duck says,
I remember that now. Yeah, you're right.
Do that. This is not the Great Western way. And Oliver says, but we're not on the Great Western, Duck. And it's a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I remember that now. That nailed it. That was really good.
Not canon, but I think effectively represents like the relationship between those two characters and their worldviews.
They're just so different, right? They come from totally different places. Duck follows the rules to the letter, and Oliver has no loyalty to them whatsoever, and will do what he thinks is right. And oftentimes that means the two of them line up, because they're both Great Western engines. They were both taught the Great Western way, and so a lot of the Great Western way is actually very good. It holds up. Oliver has assessed the Great Western way and figured out, okay, most of this is actually really good, but some of these I'm not going to do this way. And Duck would be angry about those few things, but most of the time I think they would do things the same way, because the Great Western way is actually pretty good. But there would be a few times where they would argue. I think at least once a week or maybe every few days they would get into an argument, because Oliver he simply is willing to disobey or alter more rules than Duck is. He's much more open-minded.
And it was then, after the argument, that Toad began plotting Duck's demise.
Oh my god. But so I think that's the situation with Duck, right? And I think that they're, obviously Duck is one of Oliver's closest associated characters. The Caledonian twins are the others, where I think they really have a lot to do with Oliver. Obviously, we've talked about Douglas's connection with Oliver. Douglas really empathizes with him, and he just sees himself in him, which is why he rescues him. And Donald, I don't know if we've seen Oliver and Donald interact all that much, but I assume their interactions are positive.
Not that I recall. It's really more of a Douglas thing. And in fact, in the Railway series, Toad actually becomes Douglas's brake fan.
Yeah.
After the rescue, which I think is really interesting.
It is interesting. I don't know how I feel about it. It makes sense, right? Because Donald and Douglas are the goods engines on that branch, and Oliver and Duck are passenger. So, it's weird that Oliver would have a designated brake fan. frankly, I don't even know if designated brake vans are a thing at all on railways. But
They're probably not. It's just a character thing.
But it's probably just that Toad happens to be, in that section of the island. But it's interesting. I like the idea on some level, but on the other hand, I think here's the thing. I think that when Audrey was thinking about Toad and Oliver, the way he says, like he describes Toad as, like I think this is in the beginning of Oliver the Western Engine. He's describing everybody, and he says Oliver ran away with his coach Isabel, and then a brake van named Toad. Like that. He says like a brake van, as if like I think the intention.
He's not Oliver's brake van.
Yeah, like the intention was just like they needed a brake van, so they just took one and left. And so like he didn't even really know him beforehand. I don't like that personally. I like the idea they've known each other a long time. But I don't think that was the intention. I think that Toad was just some random brake van that ended up becoming closer with Oliver once. Because think about the reason he gives. He cites the reason of, we're Great Western, must stick together. Not, I've known him for 30 years. It's, we're both Great Western and must stick together. And that paired with the idea that Toad just gets given away to Douglas, I don't think he has much of a connection to Oliver. And
which is like kind of totally becoming the antithesis of everything we've said about Toad.
I know, and it's like that's why I just kind of totally ignore that. Like that's something where I'm just like, nah, I'm going with the TV series version on this.
I mean, so I wonder if there might be like a way this works though, because I imagine that like, even if Toad and Oliver didn't work a lot together, they may have still known each other on the Great Western. They may have still like had a friendship, had at least an acquaintanceship.
Yeah.
And then, maybe what it was like, they didn't really know each other, but then Toad started becoming the one who wanted to escape.
That's interesting.
Like started, I don't want to say manipulating, but like influencing Oliver into like having the same idea so they could escape together.
That would be such an interesting thing to see. Because it's just, there's all these weird undertones where the more, at first, it looks like Oliver is the one who's escaping because he's the engine. And then the more we see of Toad and Oliver, slowly we get this bigger picture where it's like, hold on, every time that something happens, it looks like it's Oliver, when really Toad is the one who did it. So it's like, well, hold on. Toad wasn't responsible for the escape, was he? And we start wondering, but it's like he very well could have been. And, it's such an interesting concept. But yeah, the thing is, I think that could work, where Toad is literally, I think it's quite possible that Oliver and Toad didn't really know each other that well before the escape, but Toad was, like, in his yard, and, like, they were acquaintances, right? Kind of like the same way that James would know Annie and Clarabelle, even though, like, he isn't super close with them.
Sure.
And so, basically, Toad is in that yard, and, then they know each other well enough so that there's some pre-existing foundation, and then when the escape happens, that's when things really kind of start to pick up and they grow a closer connection. But what I've always thought is that I think that Oliver is closer with Isabel than he is with Toad. I think
it's interesting. I will note here that this is pretty much the first time we've talked about Isabel in the entire episode.
Yeah, that's the thing, because she's so not intertwined. She's a separate part of his life, right? Because the stories we talked about with Oliver are all goods related, and she's passenger, so she's kind of the other side of his life. But I honestly view them, I'm a little iffy on this, but I think I view them as like best friends. Like they've known each other a very long time, longer even than Oliver and Toad have known each other. I mean, I really think that Oliver and Isabel are very close.
It's really hard to say because we don't get a lot of Isabel at all. She just kind of becomes, just like any other coach in the Railway series, quite frankly. And then, Oliver, once he arrives on Sodor, there's like a one line where they're like, oh, and Sir Topham Hatt bought 3 more coaches, and 2 of them are Ducks now, and one of them is also Oliver's.
That must have been weird.
It never really gets addressed. They don't carry over into the TV series.
Yeah.
They barely have lines other than oh no, oh what's happening? You're going too fast. Every other freaking coach in the Railway series.
Everything that I think about Isabel, I think is just inferred from the fact that it speaks louder than anything else that could possibly be said that Oliver decides to bring her with him. I think that's a big deal. I think that the fact that he escapes with her. I mean, first of all, she's going to make it more difficult to escape, right? The more you bring, the harder it's going to be. But he does. And I think, I would guess that she was his coach back on his old line. Well, I mean, in fact, that's, I think, what they say. And so they worked together a long time and are probably very close. And here's the interesting thing. I almost wonder, I think that Oliver is Toad's world, but I don't think Toad is Oliver's world. I think that Oliver respects Toad a lot, cares a lot about him. Have a very deep friendship. But I think Oliver, really, Isabelle is his world. I think they are very attached to each other. They're very close. And then Toad is like a good friend of Oliver's, but there's kind of an imbalance there. Like, Toad has this immense loyalty, and you could even call it an obsession with Oliver. Like, he's kind of, his priorities, I think, a general theme here is that I think Toad's priorities are a little bit out of order. He's willing to go a little bit too far for Oliver. And meanwhile...
I wonder then if what has happened is, maybe they had an acquaintanceship on the GWR, but really the reason that Toad is so attached to Oliver now is because Oliver helped him escape. Whether we decide that was incidental, whether it was deliberate,
that's a really
one
good
way or
idea.
another, Oliver saved Toad. And now Toad feels like he owes everything to Oliver, and that's where that loyalty comes from.
Honestly, that might even be
even after he becomes Douglas's break fan or whatever else, he's still hanging around in the background, kind of watching over Oliver because he feels like that's his duty. It's what he owes to him.
Yeah, he's like his guardian angel.
And then taking that to the logical extreme.
I think that's definitely a way to see it, where it's like, in general, because of Toad, I kind of look at break fans like they're very loyal, disciplined. They're kind of servants of the railway. And I mean like public servants. They're almost the cops of the railway in a way, because they prevent the trucks from breaking away and causing mischief and endangering lives. And the break fan is the last line of defense before that. And that's what Toad is. So I think he's already very disciplined, very loyal, and I think it wouldn't be hard for him to redirect that loyalty to Oliver once, because he would just have this in his code already as a break fan, that when somebody does something of this magnitude for you, you owe them everything. And so that's that's quite possibly what happened with him. That's maybe why he feels so loyal towards Oliver. In fact, I would even go to say that's really, it's hard to argue that's not the reason. I mean, it's like, he is, like that's clearly the best thing that Oliver's ever done for him. And then that would require, but I feel like Toad's loyalty would be diminished if Toad were the one who started the escape. Then I think you have to choose either or. It's either that Toad started the escape and his loyalty comes from somewhere else, or it's that Toad is loyal to Oliver because Oliver started the escape and he wouldn't have gotten out of there without him. But either way, they're both really cool interpretations. Like, I really like both of them.
Yeah. No, we've now run through, I think, 4 or 5 different interpretations of how Oliver decided to escape.
Yeah.
I would be interested to know from the commenters below, what do you think?
Yeah.
What is your interpretation of that part of the story? How did Oliver decide to escape? Whose idea was it? And how does that influence things going forward?
Yeah, honestly, I would love to know what people's perspective on that is, because Escape is easily one of the biggest Thomas stories. It's, I think, a lot of people's favorite, and it's very interesting to analyze and think about just how it happened, because we see a weirdly small amount of that story.
It's exactly what we talked about. We meet Oliver kind of in the middle of that story, and the whole beginning of that is left up to interpretation. We just have these little clues based on how the characters behave, one line here or another line there, to kind of piece together that story. And so It's interesting that that's been it's really been left up to us to decide, why that happened, and using our knowledge of who the characters are and who they've become to decide who they were before the escape.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think we've pretty much covered Oliver. I think we've said everything. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours about Oliver, I think. I think there's a lot to pull out of him. We've gone over so many interpretations of his story. I think many more are possible. But I think that we've done a good analysis of Oliver. I think we've gone over enough that I can say, we've covered him adequately.
Yeah, there's so much to dig into with all of these characters, but Oliver in particular is just a just a wonderful and fascinating character.
Yeah,
I think this was really interesting to see the progression.
Oh yeah,
I think both of us, came in here with very different ideas about who Oliver was, and I think both of us have, kind of learned some things and picked up new perspectives that we weren't thinking about before.
I know. I really wasn't expecting to hear some of your ideas that you had. And it's just like, they really, I look at the story. The coolest thing about this is that when you get a new perspective, you read the same story, but it reads differently. It gives you kind of a new take on a really classic tale. And that's the neat thing about it. So, I'm really happy that you could come on Character Gallery today. It's been a lot of fun. And I think we've done Oliver justice today. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a real blast, and I hope I get the chance to come on here again in the future.
Oh, definitely. I'd love to have you back at some point, because this has been a great conversation. All right. So, thank you, everyone, for watching. This has been Character Gallery. I'm your host, MasterOfTheLemons, a.k.a. Lemmy.
And I'm MilkTankerMedia.
And thank you for watching.
Bye, everyone.